In knitting, there are always multiple ways of getting to the same end point. When the technique you're using isn't giving you the result you want, it's good to know what the alternatives are. In this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate several alternatives to the knit two together decrease. If you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, you can tap or mouse over the video playback area of your screen to reveal the chapter titles and starting points of each section. The knit two together is the decrease most knitters learn first because it's considered to be the simplest method and it is the default method. Unless there's a specific reason to use a different decrease, knit two together is usually the decrease that most knitters will want to make. So knit two together really describes the process. So instead of knitting one stitch, you're going to enter both stitches together at the same time. Then you get your yarn around the needle and you point and you pull it through. And that produces a result that we call a right-leaning, untwisted single decrease, because the stitch on the left, in the left column, is the one that ends up on top like this, and it appears to be leaning to the right. We say that it's untwisted because the base of the stitches are still open. And we say it's a single decrease because we've eliminated one stitch by doing this decrease. So we've taken two stitches and reduced it down to one. So that's why we call it a right-leaning, untwisted single decrease. So there is another way of getting the same result. There are actually a couple of different ways, and that's what I'm going to show you. This first method is really for continental knitters. So if you hold the yarn in your left hand, this method might work for you. Now, continental knitters do not all hold the yarn in needles in the same way. So you might have more luck with this if you are a continental knitter who has more of a closed hand when they knit and where the index finger is very close to the needle. This method might work for you better. I happen to be a continental knitter that keeps my hands more open, and I have this index finger extended when I knit typically. So this particular decrease doesn't work that well for me, but it may work for some of you. So what you do is you bring the yarn forward like you're purling so that your left needle is behind the working yarn, but your right needle is in front of it. And again, it's probably helpful if you keep your finger very close to the needle. So now you're going to enter both of these stitches as if to purl, and you're just going to pull those stitches over that piece of yarn, and that is going to produce your knit two together. I'll show you that to you again. Again, my natural continental knitting style doesn't work well, but if you have closed hands, this could work really well. So you bring the yarn forward like you were purling, but you keep the working needle in front of the working yarn, and you grab both of those stitches, and then you can just pull them over that working yarn, and then you've created your decrease. The next method will work whether you hold the yarn in your right hand or your left hand. The way that you work that is that you're going to knit the first stitch. So however you would normally knit the stitch, whether you have the yarn in your right hand or your left hand, it doesn't matter. I happen to have mine in the left hand, but I'm going to knit the stitch, and then I'm going to return it back to the left hand needle. And then I'm going to pass the second stitch over that first one like that. So now I've created my decrease, but this result is on the left hand needle, so once again I have to return it to the right hand needle. So you knit that first stitch, you return it to the left hand needle, and then you pass the second stitch over, and then you return it back to the right hand needle. So this is a technique that can be used actually to do multiple decreases. If you have to do a knit 3 together, knit 4 together, whatever it is. I've done a video on that, which I will link to above. But as long as you knit that first stitch, once you return it, you can pass as many other stitches as you need to over the knit stitch before you return it to the right hand needle. So there are a couple of reasons why you might want to use this alternative method of creating a right-leaning untwisted single decrease. And that is either your knit 2 togethers tend to be very tight and you want to loosen them up a little bit. You might find that by doing this, this version that requires a little bit more manipulation, you get a little bit looser result. So that's going to be something that if you find that your knit 2 together decreases are just too tight, that could help loosen them. The second is when you are doing mirrored decreases. So not only do you have the right leaning decrease, you're pairing it with a left leaning decrease. What you want to get is something where both results look very similar. So this is a swatch where I worked an SSK at this edge and a knit 2 together at this edge, and they actually match pretty well. This SSK is nice and straight, but in order to get it that straight, I had to go through and adjust the tension manually for each decrease that I did. And I demonstrate that in a previous video I've done on various left-leaning decreases. So it takes some extra effort for me to get that nice straight result. And to be honest, I don't always get a result that's quite as nice as that. In this swatch, I used the SKP, the slip 1, knit 1, pass a slip stitch over. And you can see that there's a little bit more of a zigzag result. And this is actually the result I do tend to get with an SSK before I hand manipulate them in order to make them more even. And on this side, I did the KSP where I knit a stitch, slipped it back, passed it over. And what you'll see is that these two actually mirror each other really well. Here's a closer view. They're both a little bit zigzaggy, but they are a good match for each other. So if your concern isn't that both of these lines be perfectly straight, but just that they look visually similar to each other, you might find that this KSP, this knit slip pass decrease, actually solves the issue that you have with your mirrored decreases not being as mirrored as you would like. Now in this swatch, I did not do the decreases on the right side of the work. I actually did them on the purl side. And what you'll see here is I have a zigzaggy decrease here, but a nice straight one there. On the purl side, you can see that a purl 2 together does not look as straight as an SSP decrease, which is the purl side version of an SSK. So this is a situation where I'm simulating something like a neckline where the decreases are pretty far away from each other. They're getting further and further away. And it's a place where as I was starting to work this neck of this little fake sweater, I was only working on these stitches. These were being held. And so I used the knit 2 together along here, which looks nice. And then when I rejoined the yarn in order to work this side, rather than working an SSK, I did my decreases on the wrong side of the work and I did an SSP. So you can get a really nice match that way. So you can choose which method that you want to use to get a particular result. You don't always have to use knit 2 together and SSK. In this video, I demonstrated several alternative methods to a knit 2 together decrease, as well as options for getting better results when mirroring decreases. When you know you have options and understand what those options are, you can take control over getting the results you prefer in your knitting. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.